My own daughter offered to take my coat. She smiled at me the way you smile at a stranger who has come a long way and looks like he could use a warm drink. Polite, professional, empty. Not dad. Not father. Not even the tiniest flicker of recognition behind her eyes. She called me sir. And I stood in the doorway of the house I had built stone by stone, looking at my only child, and I could not move. Not because I had forgotten her face, but because I had spent 9 years keeping that face alive in my mind. Through comas, rehabilitation centers, physical therapy sessions that left me weeping on a hospital floor. And now here she was, 3 feet in front of me, and she had no idea who I was. My name is Colonel Train Beaumont. Most people who knew me called me Cole Train. The people who thought I was dead just called me gone. I was 68 years old, thin as birch, with a wild white beard and a canvas coat I had bought secondhand in Missoula. I was leaning on a cane. My hands shook slightly on cold mornings, a leftover gift from the stroke. I looked like nothing. I looked like a tired old man who had wandered up the mountain by accident. That was exactly what I needed Hayward to see. Because sewn into the lining of that cheap coat were documents worth more than everything beneath our feet. And I had not come back to beg. I had come back to finish what my brother thought he had already won. Before we go any further, if you are watching this and you have never subscribed to Eamon's Revenge Stories, now is the time. Every week, real stories about betrayal, survival, family karma, and the kind of justice that waits until the moment is exactly right. Hit subscribe. You do not want to miss how this one ends. Now let me take you back to where it started, 9 years earlier. It was an ordinary October morning at Beaumont Hollow. The aspens had already gone gold on the upper ridge. The horses were in the south pasture. I was standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the mountains, and my wife and I had spent 4 decades turning into something worth leaving behind. Maribel had been gone 6 years by then. Breast cancer. We had 42 years together before it took her, and I still could not look at the old ponderosa on the ridge without feeling the weight of the promise I made beside her grave, that I would watch over our daughter no matter what happened to me. Then my skull split open from the inside. I did not feel it coming. 1 second, I was standing at the counter. The next, my right hand went numb and the coffee mug slipped out of my fingers. I heard it hit the tile. I heard the sound of it breaking. Then I was on the floor and I could not breathe right, and the room was going dark around the edges in a way that did not feel temporary. A stroke. A severe one. By the time they got me to the hospital in Zurich, I had been traveling for a real estate consultation and was not home when it happened. My brain had gone too long without sufficient oxygen. I slipped into a coma so deep the doctors stopped using hopeful language. They spoke in survival rates and legal decisions. They spoke about my condition the way you speak about weather, factually, without attachment, because the outcome was not something anyone believed they could influence. I was a body in a bed. For 2.5 years, that is all I was. Back in Montana, my family was told I was dead. Not near death, not unconscious, dead. My brother Hayward flew to Zurich, met with the clinic administrators, nodded at the right moments, and came back home with the kind of grief that photographs well. He organized a memorial service. He commissioned a casket. He stood beside my daughter Wynne and held her hand and told everyone that Call Train Beaumont would have wanted this. A proper farewell, dignity in loss, the family looking forward instead of backward. Then he went home and started signing papers. What none of them knew, what Hayward could not have known, because by the time the doctors figured it out, they had already stopped calling anyone, was that 2 months after that memorial service, something in my brain began to wake up. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, where a man opens his eyes and immediately asks for water and says something meaningful. It was slower than that. It was weeks of tiny signals. Fingers twitching. Eyes moving behind closed lids. Breathing shifting. The nurses documented it carefully. The lead physician, a quiet Belgian man named Dr. Ertz, read the reports 3 times before he allowed himself to believe it. Then one morning, I opened my eyes. Dr. Ertz was standing at the foot of my bed when it happened. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he sat down in the chair beside me, put his face in his hands, and said something in French that I later learned translated roughly to, "This should not be possible." I could not speak. I could barely lift my hand, but I was awake. Recovery was the worst experience of my life. Worse than losing Maribel. Worse than the months I spent in the early years sleeping in a truck cab on a Montana roadside because I did not have enough money for a motel and a meal on the same night. I had to learn how to swallow without choking. I had to learn how to move my right hand, which had forgotten it belonged to me. I had to stand up and sit back down 50 times a day until my legs stopped betraying me. I had to speak my own name again and again until it sounded like a real word instead of something a drowning man was trying to say. Every therapist I worked with was kind and patient and professional. Every single one of them also made it quietly clear that I had come back from a place most people do not come back from. I did not feel lucky. I felt furious. Because the whole time I was learning to swallow again, I was also learning something else. When the clinic staff finally reached my family to inform them I had woken up, the line on Hayward's end was a long silence. Then he asked them to please confirm they were speaking about Colonel Train Beaumont. When they confirmed it, he said he would need to speak with legal counsel before making any decisions about repatriation. Legal counsel. His brother had just woken up from a 2.5-year coma, and Hayward's first call was to a lawyer. Dr. Ertz told me this himself. He was not supposed to, but he had spent months watching me fight my way back from nothing, and I think he felt I had earned the truth. After that conversation, I made my own decision. I would not call Hayward. I would not call Wynn, not yet. Not until I understood exactly what had happened while I was gone. I would get strong. I would get documentation. I would find out what 9 years of being dead had cost my family. And then I would come home quietly. It took another 18 months before I was healthy enough to travel without a medical escort. By then, I had hired Lenora Marston. Lenora was a forensic accountant based out of Salt Lake City, small, direct, with reading glasses she always pushed up onto her forehead and a mind like a steel trap. She had been recommended to me by Dr. Ertz, who had apparently helped another family in a similar situation. I gave her what I had: account numbers, trust documents, the names of Hayward's personal attorney and financial advisor, and I asked her to find out what had moved and where it had gone. She called me back 6 weeks later. "I need more time," she said. "Why?" "Because there is more here than either of us expected." I gave her more time. While she worked, I worked too. I contacted the original land patent office. I pulled my own financial records from the accounts Hayward did not know I had, a private trust I had set up in Maribel's name before the stroke, quietly, mostly because I liked keeping certain things separate. I contacted my original estate attorney in Missoula, who had been retired for 4 years but still had files. I learned that Hayward had declared me legally dead within 14 months of the memorial service. He had used the clinic's early prognosis, the memorial itself, and an affidavit from a Zurich physician who had since retired. The declaration had been processed cleanly, efficiently, without challenge, because no one was alive to challenge it. Then Lenora called me again. The IRS debt, she said, never existed. I sat very still in my rehabilitation room in Geneva. "Say that again." "The back taxes your daughter believes she owes nearly $2 million on. They were fabricated. Your estate was current. Your trusts were funded. Your LLCs were clean. Every notice your daughter received was generated by a company Hayward created specifically to produce official-looking documentation. I asked her how long that company had existed. She said it had been registered about 3 weeks after my memorial service. I put the phone down and looked out the window at the Swiss Alps. 9 years. My daughter had believed for 9 years that she was buried under a debt that did not exist, working off something she did not owe, in a house that already belonged to her. And my brother had been the one holding the shovel. By the time I boarded the plane back to America, I had already been in contact with the FBI field office in Missoula. I had already transmitted the financial documentation Lenora had compiled. I had already given a preliminary statement and received confirmation that federal agents were ready to move when I gave the signal. I had already decided exactly how this was going to end. I just needed Hayward to think it was not ending at all. The iron gate at the entrance to Beaumont Hollow was the first thing that told me how far things had gone. The old cedar split-rail fence I had built with my own hands was completely gone. In its place stood a black wrought iron structure with the Beaumont family monogram welded into the center panel, decorative, expensive, and placed there by a man whose name was not Beaumont in any way that mattered. I sat in the rental car for a long moment and looked at it. Then I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Wild white beard, canvas coat, second-hand hat. Hands that shook when I was tired. I looked honestly like a man who had been through something. Which I had. The gravel drive to the main lodge was lined with solar path lights buried along both edges. Something Maribel would have found ridiculous and ostentatious in equal measure. The lodge itself sat at the end of the drive under the October sky, and it took me a moment to recognize it at all. The warm timber and stone structure Maribel and I had spent 2 summers building was still there in outline. But Hayward had done to it what men like him always do when they get hold of something someone else built with love. He had covered it in glass and polished steel and money. A great A-frame window had replaced the entire western wall. A chimney twice the height of the original rose above the roofline like a statement. Landscaping lights buried at the bases of trees I had planted 40 years ago illuminated them like gallery pieces. Guest cottages stood where the equipment shed used to be. A gravel parking area had replaced the horse paddock. Something tightened in my chest that had nothing to do with the stroke. I adjusted my coat, touched the hidden documents once through the lining, and drove up to the house. The front door stood half open. Warm yellow light spilled through it. From inside came the kind of easy, wealthy laughter that belongs to people who have paid for the privilege of pretending somewhere beautiful is theirs. I knocked on the doorframe. She appeared almost immediately. A woman in her 40s, too thin, wearing black slacks and a white blouse, and the careful, practiced expression of someone who has learned to be invisible unless directly needed. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly. Her eyes were professionally neutral. She held an empty serving tray in both hands. She looked at me and smiled the way hotel staff smile at elderly guests who might need a moment. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Beaumont Hollow. Are you here for the Cressel dinner?" I could not speak. Because I knew that face the way you know a face that has lived inside you for 9 years. I knew the shape of her jaw and the way her right eyebrow lifted slightly when she was uncertain. I knew the sound of her laugh and the exact way she cried, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes like she was trying to push the grief back in. I had taught this woman to ride a horse before she could spell her own last name. I had carried her on my shoulders through the first snowfall of her life. I had held her in this very hallway, this exact place where we were standing right now, while she cried herself empty the morning her mother died. My daughter Wynne was standing 3 feet in front of me with a serving tray in her hands, and she did not know me. I opened my mouth. The word, her name, was right there. But something stopped it. Not fear. Something older than fear. The understanding that if I said her name too quickly, in the wrong moment, in front of the wrong people, Hayward would know immediately that the old man in the doorway was dangerous. So I swallowed the word and said instead, "I'm looking for Hayward Beaumont." Something changed in her face at that name. Not a big change. She was too practiced for big changes. But I caught it, a quick tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second where the professional smile faltered. Fear. Not surprise, not confusion. The particular kind of fear that lives in someone who has learned to be careful. She turned and went inside to find him. I stood in the doorway and breathed. Hayward came out looking like a man who had convinced himself he deserved everything he was wearing. He was 65, but working hard to look 55. His hair had been dyed a soft chestnut brown that no Beaumont man had ever come by naturally. His face was smooth in the way that takes maintenance. His clothes were the kind of clothes that say quietly but clearly that money is not something this person worries about. He came toward me with the comfortable walk of a man who owns the porch he is standing on. He smiled. Then the porch light caught my face. I watched it happen the way you watch a window shatter in slow motion. The smile died in layers, first his eyes, then the corners of his mouth, then the color left his skin in one long, steady wave. He stood completely still. For 1 full second, Hayward Beaumont had no performance ready. "Hello, brother," I said quietly. "I hear you've been taking good care of my ranch." The performance came back fast. I will give him that. He stepped forward with his arms opening, his face rearranging itself into something that looked like devastated joy, the expression of a man who cannot believe the miracle standing in front of him. I did not move. That stopped him. He lowered his arms and gave a small, broken laugh, the kind men produce when they need witnesses to believe they are overwhelmed. "Coltrane," he said softly. "My God, is that really you?" He said all the right things. He said they had been told I was gone. He said they had held a service, buried an empty casket. He said he had mourned me every day. Then he turned and called for Wynne. My daughter appeared behind him. She looked at me, and I watched recognition build behind her eyes the way dawn builds behind a mountain, slowly at first, then all at once, then impossibly bright. The serving tray slipped from her hands. It hit the slate floor and broke. "Dad," she whispered, and then she ran. She ran across the porch and into my arms and held on so hard I felt the cane shift under my weight, and I did not care. I held her back with everything I had left. She was shaking. Her whole body was shaking. "They told me you died," she said into my coat. "They said you were gone. They said you died alone in that hospital, and I wanted to come. I begged Uncle Hayward to let me come, but he said it would be too hard. He said you wouldn't want me to see you like that." She pulled back enough to look at my face. "He said the best thing I could do was stay here and work." Work. That word landed differently than she meant it to. It landed in my chest like a cold key finding a lock. I looked over her shoulder at Hayward. His face had found its way back to calm. He stood in the doorway with his hands loose at his sides, unhurried, like a man watching something he has already decided the outcome of. His wife Shara had appeared beside him, tall, sharp-featured, in a silk blouse too fine for the mountain air. She looked at me with the expression of a person who has just noticed a problem that will need to be managed. "What did you do to my daughter?" I asked. Hayward spread his hands. He said it carefully. He said he had saved her. He said that after my death, the estate was in serious trouble. Back taxes, trust complications, unpaid liabilities going back years. He said the IRS had been close to seizing everything. He said if he had not stepped in personally, Wynn would have lost the ranch, the lodge, her inheritance. He said he had advanced nearly $2 million out of his own funds to protect her. He said she was working to pay it back. He said all of this in the tone of a reasonable man explaining a reasonable arrangement. I turned to Wynn. Is that what happened? She looked at her feet. Her voice was barely a sound. I owed almost $2 million. He paid it. He saved the ranch. I work here to pay back what he advanced. She believed it. Every word of it. She had believed it for 9 years. I wanted to overturn the table right there. I wanted to look at Hayward and say all of it out loud. The fake IRS notices, the shell companies, the stolen $14 million, the plan to lock me in a memory care facility so he could finish taking everything. But rage is cheap. I had spent 9 years paying for patience, so I let my shoulders fall. I let my voice go soft. I thanked Hayward for stepping in when I was gone. I said I had not known. I said I was sorry Wynn had carried so much on her own. Hayward relaxed by degrees. The tension left his shoulders. He offered me a room, not in the main lodge but in the guest cottage out back. Said it would be quieter. Said I looked tired and probably needed rest. He thought. The old man had come back too late. He had no idea I had come back with everything. The guest cottage was the old bunkhouse, unchanged in the ways that matter. Same low ceiling, same narrow windows, same bare plank floor. But now it held a single bed with a thin mattress, a lamp on a table, and nothing on the walls. Wynn moved around it with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned not to occupy space without permission. I sat on the edge of the bed and asked her about Tess, her husband, the man I had met only once before the stroke took me away from everything. She wrapped her arms around herself. He had left 5 years ago, she said. He had taken Bram back to Spokane. Shara had said from the beginning that Tess was only interested in the inheritance. She said men like that disappeared when the money ran out. And then she had said something else, something quieter, something designed to stay. She had told Wynn that if she stopped working, stopped cooperating, stopped paying back what she owed, Tess would use her tax problems against her. He would claim she was an unfit mother. He would take Bram permanently. Wynn looked at her hands. I thought I was protecting him, she said. I thought if I just kept working and kept paying it back, eventually everything would be okay. Eventually I could go see him. How long has it been? I asked. 5 years. I did not say anything for a moment. 5 years. My daughter had not held her son in 5 years, because Hayward and Shara had told her that staying, working, cooperating, shrinking was the only way to keep him safe. I reached over and took her hand. Do you believe them? I asked. She looked up at me and her eyes were so tired. I don't know what to believe anymore. I squeezed her fingers and leaned closer. Believe this, I said. I am your father. I am alive. And I did not come back here to watch you suffer. After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time. I could hear the lodge from where I sat. Laughter, music, the particular ease of people spending money on an experience they will post about and then forget. Hayward's guests, drinking in my house, under the roof I had built, in a place they believed belonged to a man who had earned nothing. I pulled out my phone. Marston, I said when the line picked up, I'm in place. They took everything I gave them. Lenora's voice was calm and precise, the way it always was when the picture had become clear. Coltrane, I need you to hear this carefully. I says I was listening. There were never any back taxes. Not $1. Your estate was current. Your trusts were funded. Every debt notice Wynn received was fabricated through a document company. Hayward registered in Nevada 3 weeks after your memorial service. I closed my eyes. Lenora kept going. She had traced $14 million from my operating accounts through a series of Wyoming shell companies to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The construction work on the lodge, the glass A-frame, the guest cottages, the landscaping, the gate, all of it had been paid with my money. Hayward's vehicles, his personal expenses, charitable donations in his own name, a second property in Jackson Hole, all of it funded by accounts he had no legal right to touch. And there was an attorney involved, a man named Peyton, in Hamilton. He had helped structure the transfers, drafted the forged documents, and was currently preparing final paperwork that would have collapsed my original trust within the next 60 days and handed complete control of the remaining assets to Hayward. He had been weeks away from finishing the job. "And Tess?" I asked. "Never threatened her," Lenora said. "He has been in Spokane since he left. He works construction. He has had primary custody of Bram since the separation, which Wynn agreed to voluntarily. She has the paperwork, call train, and if she reads it carefully, she will see that she can request modification any time she chooses. There was no legal threat. There was never a legal threat." I said nothing for a long time. "Federal agents are ready," Lenora said. "Just give us the location and the timing." I said, "Tomorrow, Peyton's office. Hayward is going to take me there himself." "How do you know that?" "Because that is the kind of man he is. He will want to watch me sign." I ended the call. Then I reached under the collar of my coat and activated the small recording device I had placed there before I ever drove up that gravel road. It was no bigger than a button. Hayward had pretended to embrace me when I arrived, and I had pressed it flat against the inside of his sweater collar in the half-second we were close. He thought that moment was him performing grief for the guests watching from the doorway. It was me planting a witness. I put the receiver in my ear and listened. Hayward's voice came through first, speaking to Shara in the study. He sounded relaxed now, almost amused. He said, not to worry about the old man. He said I was a wreck, half dead already. He said men who came out of long comas the way I had did not have much runway left. Shara asked, what would happen if I started asking about the financial records? Hayward said they would take me to Peyton's office in the morning and get the final documents signed. He said that if I resisted, they would use Wynn. They would tell me her debt was coming due immediately. They would threaten federal tax fraud charges. They would make me believe that signing was the only way to save my daughter from prison. And afterward? He said they would arrange for me to be transferred to a memory care facility in Bozeman. He said he already had a contact there. He said the staff could be briefed to document confusion and cognitive decline. He said that within a week, I would be medicated and unreachable, and any claim I made about the ranch or the money would simply be the sad ramblings of a man whose mind had not survived the coma intact. Shara asked if Wynn would figure it out eventually. Hayward said it did not matter. She's good at her job, he said. The guests like her. As long as she thinks she owes us, she stays. That's 8 years of free labor, Shara, and she hasn't stopped once. I took out the receiver. I set it on the narrow table beside the lamp. I sat with my hands flat on my knees and breathed slowly for a long time. Not because I was frightened, because I was deciding very carefully how much mercy my brother had earned. By sunrise, I had my answer. None. I had one more conversation to have before Peyton's office. The next morning, Hayward sent Wynn to take me for a walk up the ridge. He thought he was being clever. He wanted me out of the lodge while he prepared the paperwork, while Shara confirmed the memory care facility, while Peyton arranged the signing table with everything in its proper place. He thought he was managing me the way he had managed everything else. But the moment Wynn and I were far enough from the lodge to be out of sight, I stopped limping. She noticed immediately. I straightened my back. I shifted the cane to my left hand. I spoke to her in the voice I had not used since before the stroke, the voice she had grown up hearing, the one that meant, "This is not a conversation, this is the truth." When there were no back taxes, she went still. What? There was no debt, there was no estate problem. Your inheritance was never in danger. Every document Hayward showed you was forged. Her face changed slowly, the way faces change when the mind is working faster than the body can catch up. I reached inside my coat and pulled out the envelope. Real IRS records, real trust filings, real bank statements, wire transfers to shell companies, emails between Hayward and Peyton going back 8 years, building the trap one document at a time. She took the papers with shaking hands. She read the first page, then the second. Then she went back to the first and read it again. 9 years, she said. Her voice was almost nothing. 9 years of my life, my marriage, my son, all of it for a lie. I put my hands on her shoulders. This afternoon, I am going to Peyton's office. I am going to let Hayward put the papers on the table and the pen in my hand. And when he does, federal agents will be waiting. She looked up at me. You set this up before you even got here. I have been setting this up for 2 years. Her eyes were wet. Tess, she said, Bram. Tess never threatened you, I said. He is in Spokane right now. He has been raising Bram and working construction and waiting for the woman he married to come home. I contacted him 3 weeks ago. He knows the truth now. He is waiting for you. That was when my daughter finally broke. Not from weakness. From the unbearable relief of learning that the cage had never been locked. Hayward drove me into Hamilton in a German sedan that probably cost more than Wynne had earned in 9 years of working her own family's land. He talked the entire drive. He talked about expanding the lower pasture into an event venue. He talked about hotel partnerships and luxury retreats and an investor he had been speaking to in Bozeman. He talked about Beaumont Hollow's future the way men talk about things they have already decided belong to them. He talked about my ranch like I had never existed. I sat in the passenger seat and looked at the mountains and let him enjoy the last 30 minutes of believing he had won. The law office occupied a restored Victorian building on Main Street. Polished floors, expensive furniture, the kind of careful quiet that money pays for. Peyton stood when we entered, tall and precise, in a dark jacket, with a neutral expression that was probably taught in law school. On his desk sat a neat stack of documents with colored tabs at every signature line. Hayward set a fountain pen in front of me. He explained the formality of it. Sign here, here, and here. The estate would be consolidated. Wynne's debt would be resolved. I could rest. Everything simplified, everything settled. Then he leaned closer. His voice dropped. He said I should think about my daughter. He said I should think about what happened if those debts came due. He said Wynne had already lost her husband once, and I should ask myself if I really wanted her to lose Bram too. He said one signature, and she walked away clean. Peyton slid the pen a fraction of an inch closer to my hand. Your brother is offering you mercy, he said. I picked up the pen. Hayward's posture eased. I turned the pen slowly between my fingers and looked at both of them. Then I set it down. No. The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when something has changed that cannot be changed back. Hayward blinked once. I said no, I said. And I said no because there is no debt. I opened my coat and spread the real documents across Peyton's forged papers. IRS records, wire transfer logs, shell company registrations, emails between the two men sitting in front of me, going back to the year of my memorial service. And then the last document. I laid it flat. Federal arrest warrants, signed this morning in Missoula. The office door opened. 3 men in suits entered from the hallway. The first one raised a badge. FBI, Hayward Beaumont, You are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of federal tax documents, embezzlement, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Please stand up." Hayward stood up. His face had gone the color of old plaster. His eyes moved from the agents to Peyton to me, and back again, searching for the angle that was not there. The lie that could still save him. The version of this moment where he came out ahead. There was no such version. Peyton backed away from his own desk so fast, his chair scraped hard across the floor. His hands were visible and shaking. He knew what was in those emails. He knew his name was on every document. My phone buzzed. A message from Lenora. "Shara taken into custody at the lodge. Wynn is safe." I looked at Hayward while the agents cuffed his hands behind his back. I really looked at him. I had known this man my entire life. I had sat across from him at every Christmas table. I had stood beside him at our father's funeral. He had stood beside me at Maribel's grave and put his hand on my shoulder and said nothing, because that was what brothers do when words are not enough. And then he had gone home and looked at my coma like a business opportunity. "You set me up," he said. His voice was tight and high in the way voices get when fear runs out of room. "No," I said. "You set yourself up 9 years ago. I just made sure someone was watching when it finally fell." I reached into my coat one last time and took out the first forged IRS notice. The document that had started everything. The paper that had turned my daughter's home into a prison. I tore it in half. Then in half again. "This debt never existed," I said, "and now you are going to spend a very long time paying for every day she believed it did." Hayward was still talking when they walked him through the front door. He was still explaining, still performing, still finding angles in a story that had run out of angles entirely. His voice carried down the hallway and out onto Main Street, and I stood in that polished law office and listened to it get smaller and smaller until it was gone. Then I sat down in the chair across from Petton's empty desk, and I put my face in my hands for a moment. Not because I was sad. Because 9 years is a long time to carry something, and when you finally set it down, your body does not always know immediately what to do without the weight. I drove back to the ranch alone. By the time I came up the drive, Shara's car was gone. Sheriff's deputies had already taken her down the same gravel road she had spent years acting like she owned. Lenora's message said she had disputed everything from the moment they put the handcuffs on. She had cited her reputation, her civic involvement, her charitable giving. She had said there had been a misunderstanding. She had said a great many things, none of which changed the documents. Wynn was standing on the porch when I pulled in. She was not wearing the serving uniform anymore. She had found one of my old flannel shirts from somewhere, faded at the elbows, soft from years of use, and her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was standing on the porch of her own house with her arms at her sides, and for the first time since I had come home, she looked less like someone waiting to be told what to do, and more like the woman I raised. "What happens now?" she asked. I climbed the stairs slowly and put my arm around her. "Now we get your family back." She breathed in sharply. "They're already on their way. I sent Tess the itinerary 2 days ago. They land in Missoula tomorrow morning." She covered her mouth with both hands. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The next afternoon, a small SUV came slowly up the drive. Tess got out first, older, thinner, with gray at his temples, and the particular quiet of a man who has been working very hard at something for a very long time without knowing when it would end. Then a boy climbed down from the passenger side, small and careful, in a flannel jacket, looking at the ranch with wide, uncertain eyes. Wynn made a sound I will carry with me until I am gone. It was not a cry exactly. It was not a laugh. It was something between them, all the grief and the years and the relief arriving at the same time, at the same volume, in a sound the human chest was maybe not built to contain. She ran across the gravel. She dropped to her knees. She pulled them both in. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know." Bram looked over her shoulder at me. He had his mother's eyes. "Are you my grandpa?" he asked, "the one who was asleep for a long time?" I walked over and crouched down as far as my knees would allow. "That's me," I said, "but I'm awake now, and I'm not going anywhere again." The courts moved in their own time, which is slower than anger but more permanent. Hayward tried everything. He claimed confusion about the financial arrangements. He claimed grief had impaired his judgment in the years after my apparent death. He claimed he had believed, genuinely, that he was acting in the family's best interest. His attorneys were expensive and prepared. None of it mattered. The forged IRS documents were traceable. The shell company registrations were documented. The wire transfers were auditable. The offshore accounts were frozen. The recording from the lodge, Hayward explaining, in his own voice, his plan to have me drugged and institutionalized, was entered into evidence and played in a federal courtroom in Missoula. By the time the prosecution finished laying out 9 years of fraud, embezzlement, document forgery, and elder exploitation, even Hayward's legal team had stopped pretending he was misunderstood. The judge sentenced him to 17 years in federal prison. Shara received 12. Peyton lost his law license before he lost his freedom. His name became a warning in Montana legal circles in the weeks before his sentencing. He received 8 years. The financial unraveling took longer. Courts rarely move quickly when money is involved, but they moved. The shell companies were dissolved. The offshore accounts were traced and seized. The luxury vehicles were sold at auction. The fake transfer documents were voided. The stolen funds, what remained after Hayward had spent years moving and hiding and spending, were pulled back piece by piece through the federal recovery process. Some went directly to Wynn. Some were returned to the original trust. A portion went to other family members Hayward had quietly taken advantage of in the years before anyone knew to look. It was not perfect. No court order can give a mother back 5 years of her son's life. No sentence addresses the nights Wynn lay in that bare guest cottage, believing she had ruined everything and deserved nothing better. No ruling restores the marriage that should never have had to survive what it survived. But when Hayward was led out of that courtroom in handcuffs, not performing grief, not working an angle, not speaking at all, something that had been sitting in my chest for 9 years finally moved. He had spent nearly a decade building an empire out of other people's loss. In the end, every wall of it collapsed on top of him. 8 months after my return, the backhoe came for the A-frame. Wynn and I stood on the porch and watched. The great glass wall came down first, then the polished stone entryway, then the expensive landscaping Shara had planted where Maribel's wildflowers used to grow. The wrought iron gate with the stolen family monogram had already been hauled to the scrapyard. The luxury guest cottages were empty. The dining room where Wynn had poured wine for strangers who did not know they were guests in her house had been stripped back to the bones. Under all of it, the original stone foundation was still there. The one Maribel and I had poured in 1984. Solid and level and completely unbroken. Bram sat on my shoulders while we watched. Tess leaned against the porch rail with a thermos, quiet in the way a good man is quiet when something hard is finally being put right. Wynn had her arms wrapped around herself, not the way she had held herself when I first came home, bracing against the cold, making herself small. This time it was the comfortable posture of a person who has somewhere safe to stand. "Are you sure, Dad?" she asked. I looked at the foundation under all the rubble. "The bones were never damaged," I said. "He covered them up. He couldn't destroy them. Bram tugged the brim of my hat. "Grandpa Cole," he said, "can I help build the new one?" I reached up and held his small hands where they rested on my head. "Every single board," I said. "We built something smaller that fall. Warmer. A real house. Wood floors, a stone fireplace, a kitchen wide enough for more than one person to work in at the same time. Family photographs on the walls. A porch wide enough for all of us to sit on when the sun dropped behind the ridge. No guest cottages. No event venues. No polished stone entryway. Just a home. The kind of home you leave to your children, not because they are obligated to receive it, but because you built it with them in mind from the beginning."
Wynne walks the fence lines again in the mornings. She has started writing in the evenings. "Stories," she says, though she will not let me read them yet. Most days, I hear her laugh from the kitchen without knowing what caused it, and it sounds exactly the way it sounded when she was young, and had no reason to be anything but herself.
Tess stayed. He did not need to be thanked or reassured. He did not ask for explanations every morning. He simply stood beside her and kept showing up, which is the quiet version of love that sustains people through the long work of healing. Bram has become the kind of child who accumulates projects. There is always a half-finished birdhouse or a piece of rope he is teaching himself to knot. He wears his boots to breakfast and brings mud into rooms I have stopped trying to keep clean. He calls me Grandpa Cole. Every time he says it, something in me that broke a long time ago fits back together a little more. I sit on the porch most evenings now, in the last of the mountain light, and I think about what it means that I came home at all. Hayward made one choice in a hospital waiting room in Zurich. He looked at his brother in a coma, at the numbers in those accounts, at the land and the name and everything that might be available if the right documents were filed before the wrong questions were asked. And he decided that family was a category that could be renegotiated. From that moment on, every lie was easier than the one before. One forged notice became 10. One shell company became 7. One cruel implication about a daughter's husband became 5 years of a mother believing she had no choice but to stay. That is how families are destroyed. Not usually in one loud moment. Usually in paperwork. In small quiet falsehoods that accumulate the way snow accumulates. So gradually that by the time the weight is dangerous, you have forgotten there was ever a time without it. But here is what Hayward never understood about the family he spent 9 years trying to replace. You can steal a house. You can forge tax documents. You can transfer accounts and manipulate trusts and pay good money for very convincing-looking official letterhead. But a lie only needs one true thing to bring it down. And the true thing he could not account for was me. A tired old man in a second-hand coat with a cane in one hand and the proof in the other, standing in his own doorway, watching his daughter not recognize him and deciding very carefully to be patient for just a little while longer. He built his empire on the assumption that I was gone. He was wrong. And Beaumont Hollow, the land, the name, the foundation under all the rubble he left behind, is ours again. If this story stayed with you until the end, I want to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed silent and gathered your proof the way Coltrane did? Or would you have confronted Hayward the moment you saw your daughter working in her own home? Tell me below. And if you believe that betrayal always leaves a trail and that patience is the most dangerous thing a person can carry, subscribe to Eamon's Revenge Stories. New stories every week. Betrayal, survival, karma, and the kind of justice that takes its time but always eventually arrives. Thank you for listening.